Good morning, beautiful friends, or for those of you who are catching it later from a different time zone, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. We're going to start our way of the Cherag this month with little random movie references like that. And then we'll get serious about this and start with the invocation. And I'll put it in the chat window, though I think all of you are very familiar with it. So you're welcome to join us in these words of Puro Murshidanayak Khan that really just lay a foundation for how we want to turn our hearts in the direction of our prayerful intentions in each moment to welcome the spirit of guidance and the all-pervading reality into our immediate direct experience right here, right now. Towards the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. Amen. So welcome to our quarterly Way of the Cherag meeting that Rahima really started this rhythm when she was holding the Universal Worship Concentration for Sarati Anayat. And since she has moved into other responsibilities, I have agreed to take on this particular activity that feels important, useful, warm, welcoming, encouraging, uplifting, informative, and really helps us as a community of friends, as Sarati Anayat friends, of being able to share the journey, our experiences along the way, what we learn, what we find helpful in our fulfilling work in the world. And so Chirags, as literally lamps, that is the vessels that carry the light of wisdom and spiritual nourishment from the source, the one, to the communities that we serve, that we work with and move in. There are so many things that are fulfilling, enriching, and challenging, and confusing, complex. And so this is an opportunity for us to share and connect with each other, to support each other, and to welcome and invite the wider community to experience and understand more of the work of ministry in this interfaith, universal Sufi capacity. So I'm very happy to have all of you with us today, those of you who are ordained Chirags and Sirajas, and those of you who are interested in it or that are doing your other forms of spiritual service and engagement with the world. So thank you for being part of this. Today we have Raqiba is with us as a Cherag presenter, and Rahima and myself will be offering some teachings and experiences, practices that are relevant and connect to our work as Cherags, and then we'll have some time for conversation amongst all of us to talk about our own experiences and things that we found useful. So today's theme is focused on the practices, that is, the spiritual practices, prayers, tools that help us develop, deepen, support ourselves and our own soul's unfoldment as Chirags. And many of these things I expect are going to be relevant and meaningful for anyone in any capacity of humanness alive on this planet, and some of them might be very specifically about the practices that are helpful for us in our forms of ministry. So I look forward to hearing. We have not shared with each other all of the things that we're going to bring out today, so it'll be a discovery and a delight for all of us. So I would love to invite our beautiful friend Raqiba to get us started, and thank you for being with us. It's not nearly often enough that we get to hear from Raqiba, and she lives a couple hours away from us, also in Colorado right now, fortunately for Colorado, and went through Cherag training with some of us that are on here. So it feels like a lot of years ago now. It probably wasn't very long ago. And I'm so happy to say that Raqiba has been in spiritual community with me for a very, very long time, since we were both in our 20s. Now we're both in our 40s. So it's been a long, beautiful journey that seems hopefully to have many years ahead of us still. So thank you, Raqiba, for being with us. And please take us wherever you wish.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes, right? That's kind of give or take. Okay. Um, so I'm just so happy to be here. And yeah, it does feel like a long time ago that I started the Cherag program 2019. So it kind of was a bit ago. Um, so spiritual practices. Okay. I love spiritual practices, and I kind of think of this, it's sort of like spiritual development or cultivating that connection to source. And as I was pondering this theme, I was reminded of this plaque, like a poster that I saw in a dentist office once. And it was like, you only have to floss the teeth you want to keep. And I thought that is so relevant. Like, you really don't have to brush your teeth and floss your teeth every day. It's a practice, it kind of feels mundane, it gets sort of tedious sometimes, but it pays off in the long run. And I kind of feel like our spiritual practices are the same thing, like this reminder of we really do become what we do every day. And it's this sort of like the age old adage of taking baby steps and creating this space for ourselves to do the things that we want to embody. And I'm pretty sure we probably all have like a story of being around maybe like a spiritual person um, that maybe like doesn't necessarily like walk their talk. So it's like a lot of words, but it's not really an embodiment of the spiritual teachings. And I feel like that's that sort of reminder of how, you know, being on our spiritual paths and showing up to do this work in our communities is an embodied practice. And our mind doesn't think us through these spiritual teachings. It's more of how we become. It's life is a frequency, it's a vibration. And so the way that we end up expanding through the world really is a product of how we're building ourselves, the sort of mundane habits and practices that we do every day. So I was sort of like, I have a lot of different practices that I do. I pray every day. I'm outside in nature. I have a dog who gets me outside. So a lot of my prayer work is outside in nature. It's just me, my dog, and the elements. Um, But a lot of my favorite work is breath work, and I love doing the wazifa practices. So I thought I would focus on those today. Um, so I have a yoga background also before I became a Shirag, and so breath work is very important to me. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and so probably nothing that I say is new, but our breath work is so amazing, right? Like our the power, the ability that we have to take a breath greatly informs how we are in the world. And so by doing our breath work and by cultivating this consciousness around our breath, we're sort of connecting to that mysterious side of life that supports us. Um, Also, we're retraining the neuromuscular memory and we're getting out of the sympathetic nervous system and into the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's highly effective as far as being a healing practice and creating wonderful mental health and calming us down. Um, it also, when we do our breath work, then whatever comes to us in our world, we have the ability without having to think about it to be more responsive and not to be reactive. And so we can just greater serve in general. And it boosts our mood. It decreases high blood pressure. Um, it also helps to deepen relaxation just in general. and it improves focus and memory. It also kind of makes you glow. Now, that kind of sounds vain, but have you ever noticed after you do your spiritual practices that you do kind of glow? It's like that polishing of the heart that we Sufis do ends up radiating and shining from within. So that's sort of fun. Um, and really, like in general, I'm just going to kind of backpedal a little bit. When I started kind of brainstorming what I was going to say, I came up with like 10 different reasons why our practices are so important. But I really don't have enough time to go over all those. But then the bigger picture is we are um, coming into alignment with our true self. So like our Sufi practices is sort of we're coming into alignment with the big S self, and we're cultivating that connection. So what else did I want to say about that? Um just also the reminder of, the contemplative life does require us to take time to go inward. And so we have to protect that space and create that space that is quiet, and we minimize distractions, and we minimize the outside influences, so we can continue to go inward and find that space within ourselves that is connected to source, to God, to the divine. And then the wazifa practices, which I love, and I love chanting and singing and working with the voice. Um, all of us using our voice and connecting to that sacred instrument within ourselves is like our own inner, singing bowl, or our own inner tuning fork. And so it's like we've been built to use our voice as a healing instrument. And of course, the wazifa practices, chanting the beautiful names of God, deepen our connection to source and promote this sense of oneness, and again help to decrease negativity, increase positivity, and can even be indicated for depression. So it really lifts the spirit, and then helps to improve focus and our self-awareness and calmness. And so all these two practices, of course, there's a whole slew of practices, but as we continue to do these every single day or whenever we can, we're building that sort of, inner confidence. Another thing I do just want to say, like when we do these practices, we're connecting to our own sense of connection to source. And so we open up an atmosphere for originality, for how we can show up in service and kind of like stay in the sort of flow, and how we are connecting with God, and then bringing that beautiful awareness to our community. So, and then for our wazifa practice, of course, as Sufis, um, this is part of our practice of creating that atmosphere of spiritual transcendence. So it does create a sense of euphoria and bliss. So let's do some. I'm going to kind of do it backwards. So we'll do a wazifa practice. I want to invoke Ya Kudus. So we'll invoke God as the most pure, most holy, the one glorified and revered by the angels, the one whose goodness and righteousness is beyond human understanding, the spotless, loving energy of God. And we'll invoke Yahwehabo, God as the great giver, giver of gifts, as ever flowing blessings, who gives endlessly without any expectation of anything in return. And then what we'll do is let's go around. We won't do a whole tasbih. We'll do 66, so each gets 33. And then right after that, we'll drop into the elemental breaths. I love the elemental breaths. We'll integrate those as the end of our practice. And I know everybody here has already done those. I've been doing them since I first learned them from Sára, pretty much every day with just like a few skips here and there. And I love connecting to the elements, connecting to Murshid in this way. Um, yeah, and then that'll be a wrap. Okay, so Ya Kudus, Ya Wahabo. We'll go back and forth from one to the next. I'm going to keep track on my Tasbih so you can just relax and surrender into it. And I invite you to close your eyes or keep your eyes open, whatever feels more comfortable. And then we'll begin here. Ya Kudus, Ya Wahabo, 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 Ya Kudus, Ya Wahabo. Last two, Ya Kudus, Ya Wahabo. And breath of earth, inhaling and exhaling through the nose. And breath of water, inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. And breath of fire, inhaling through the mouth and exhaling through the nose. And breath of air, inhaling and exhaling through the mouth. And breath of ether, inhaling however you choose, or possibly through the nose. And completing the concentration by giving thanks to earth, to water, to fire, to air, and to ether. And opening your eyes when you're ready. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, Raqiba. I don't know how you do it. I shouldn't say this because it'll sound a little bit disrespectful, not to you, but uh, practices can be boring unless you do them with Raqiba, and then nothing is ever boring. You just, and it's not that you let anything that I have experienced as boring, but it's just the way that you shape things and invite people into it and demonstrate it is just everything becomes extra yummy when it's presented by Raqiba. Thank you, Raqiba. And also so much good information and knowledge and grounded foundational wisdom that supports the yumminess. So awesome. Thank you so much, Raqiba. And because we have a little extra time today, I just want to uh, invite possibly Raqiba, if you have maybe another 5 minutes of deliciousness to share with us near the end, that I would like to invite you back in near the end of our meeting today. Okay, just so you can anticipate. That would be lovely. Okay, friends. So now we have the great delight of getting to hear from and be with Rahima and hear the things that she finds useful, inspiring, supportive by way of practices as a Cherag and Siraj. Rahima. Well, I don't need to be in there.
Yes, well, what a amazing vast topic we have of the purpose of spiritual practices and the application. And so trying to narrow this down, I'll do my best. So the purpose, I feel like there's both the personal reason for it of enriching our own inner lives and our connection with that divine and how that can inform our lives. And then as possibly as ministers, or even any way that you've been called to, in any way that you've said yes to that calling, there's practices, and I think that will also serve us in that calling. So there's kind of those two different aspects. And in a lot of my practices, there's often a connection of almost like the symbol of the cross, where there's that connection with the source, with the divine, and then there's the more horizontal, that is representing that connection with the world around us, with the divine in the world, which is with our relationships with people, with the earth, with all of the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom. But so, and I guess in my practices, there's an attunement always to listening for the divine above and below, but that more vertical line, and then that horizontal line. And so I have three different, I guess, categories of spiritual practices and attunements that will help in this way. For me, one is just that sense of devotion and attunement to God, to Source, and how. And so I'll talk to about some different practices in that way. And then I feel for me, and possibly for Cherags that have been ordained in this order, there's certainly something about being attuned to Murshid, Anayat Khan, but it could even just be your attunement to the capital T teacher, whoever or whatever that is. So there is some sense of, having an attunement to that teacher, and then just an openness and attunement to spirit of guidance, they'll guide us in our work. So beginning with attuning to God and that sense of devotion, really, well, I'm just going to read from Anayat Khan. I read this the other day in one of the Bolasakis, but it's from Volume 1, The Way of Illumination, and Section 2 on the Inner Life. And it's Chapter 2, The Object of the Journey. But the one who is in love with God, the one who has established her relationship with God, her love becomes living. To her, all things appeal, everything unfolds itself, and it is beauty to her eyes because God is all pervading in all names and all forms. Therefore, her beloved is never absent. How happy, therefore, is the one whose beloved is never absent, because the whole tragedy of life is the absence of the beloved. And to one whose beloved is always there, when she has closed her eyes, the beloved is within. And when she has opened her eyes, the beloved is without. Her every sense perceives the beloved. Her eyes see God. Her ears hear God's voice. When a person arrives at this realization, she, so to speak, lives in the presence of God. Then to her, the different forms and beliefs, faiths and communities do not count. To her, God is all in all. To her, God is everywhere. If she goes to the Christian church, or to the synagogue, to the Buddhist temple, to the Hindu shrine, or to the mosque of the Muslim, there is God. In the wilderness, in the forest, in the crowd, everywhere she sees God. So I think just developing that relationship, the goal of the mystic, or the idea of the mystic, is to have that direct experience with God. And practices, I think, can help bring us to that, and just have that sense of devotion. And this way, I feel like there's so many different practices that can bring us to that place, and it really is so individual for each of us. But I know for me, it's often just, being in nature, as Raqiba was talking with my dog. And really, that direct relationship with nature is also that relationship with God. And having that sense of, like he said, the inner, when we close our eyes, God is there, and when we open them, God is there. God is always present, and we can always have that connection with God. And so perhaps maybe it's, for some of us, it's doing the dances, and you're seeing the eyes of the beloved and your partner in the dance. Or maybe it's chanting, like Raqiba was saying, just the song, the voice. And I think also, certainly, quieting the mind is so important, to have at least some time during the day with perhaps the elemental breaths, or some sort of wazifa practice. it's so important to, and Anayat Khan talks about this a lot, about repose. And so many of us are good at repose of the body, but often we never end up quieting our mind and repose of the mind, and how important that is to really be able to attune to the divine and to God. So, and since I know everyone does have their different forms of how they relate to God, I love this Rumi quote, and let the beauty that we love be what we do. And there are hundreds of ways to kiss the ground, right? So moving to attuning to the Murshid, to the teacher. And again, as a Cherag, and particularly for myself, as my main work as a Cherag is leading the universal worship service. So I feel it's very important for me to really attune to Murshid, who brought this practice and this ritual. And there's so many ways we could attune to Murshid, of course. Just reading his words, maybe doing tasawwuri with his picture. But for me, I feel like really attuning to the prayers, because really those are the cornerstones of the universal worship service. I mean, you could just say the prayers and you've got the essence of what this whole ritual and teaching and message of unity is all about. And so for me, that is a daily practice while I am walking in nature, is to say those prayers. And it really is, I feel like I'm having a conversation with Murshid sometimes when I'm doing these prayers. And they always feel different to me every single day, of like, well, how is this hitting me today? What line is sticking out? Where am I feeling resistance? Or, so really just having that relationship is, for me, a great way to attune to Anayat Khan. So another thing that I've done in the past is taking one line at a time of the prayer and doing that one line for a week, maybe a month. So, after I've said the prayer, then, I did this with Peer recently, which is one of the sweeter prayers for me anyway. And it's again, I think of Murshid very much when I say this prayer, but there's just so many beautiful individual lines that can be a great focus each day. And so, inspire of my mind, just saying that every day. Or, oh, inspiring guide through life's puzzling ways. In thee I feel abundance of blessing. Like, just that one line for the rest of our lives could be an amazing practice of how to attune to the guide, to the divine source, and also how we can move in this world. So I think we'll go ahead and say the prayer Peer together as a practice and an attunement to the teacher. So, as I said, I often have Murshid in my mind when I'm saying this prayer, and sometimes I have Jesus in my mind. Sometimes I'm just saying it to a tree that I visit regularly, so that anything, whatever your teacher is, that's the prayer. So I'll say this together. It's in the chat window for you. Inspirer of my mind, consoler of my heart, healer of my spirit, thy presence lifteth me from earth to heaven. Thy words flow as a sacred river, thy thought riseth as a divine spring. Thy tender feelings waken sympathy in my heart. Beloved teacher, thy very being is forgiveness. The clouds of doubt and fear are scattered by thy piercing glance. All ignorance vanishes in thy illuminating presence. A new hope is born in my heart by breathing thy peaceful atmosphere. O inspiring guide, through life's puzzling ways, in thee I feel abundance of blessing. Amen. And so, attuning to spirit of guidance. And I feel like this is certainly one of the more important things as we're serving our communities as ministers, or again, in whatever way you've been called to serve. There's an important part of emptying the small self. I think Raqiba mentioned a little bit too about attuning to that big S self. And they're really just, for me to be able to show up and do what's been asked of me, I have to really do practices to empty myself and to, I mean, of course there's always going to be, well, at least for me, some nervousness, especially if it's something where I'm actually presenting or teaching. But and that's okay. And I also feel like I'm able to really show up more, or God is able to show up more through me as that lamp, that source of light, and I'm just holding that light and shining it. That it can only shine brighter if the more I get my small S self out of the way. And so there's so many practices that we could do that can bring us to that place. For me, often it's a prostration practice. There's, again, so many different versions of it and ways and words that we can say, but even just the simple act of putting my head on the ground, onto the earth, and having my heart higher than my head, and just feeling that sense even of just the surrendering that goes with that position, I think can be really helpful. And then another practice that helps me in that way is just the zikr. I mean, that is such the core practice. If there's two practices for me and that I think many could benefit from, are the elemental breaths that Raqiba led, and then the zikr of La ilaha illallah. So that La ilaha is the negation, where we're letting go, we're bowing forward, where there's often a sweep, where we're just sweeping away, emptying the self. We just recently were at a retreat with Murshida Tasneem Hernandez, and I love the image she has of where we see that our heart is an altar, and look at like what is on that altar. And maybe there's idols or things that we want to let go of, and as we are bowing forward, what's falling off the altar, right? I love that image of La ilaha, and then Il Allah, where we're bowing into our heart, really allowing that connection with the big L, love, God, presence, so that we're filling ourselves up with the spirit of guidance and with the divine. So I want to lead us in that practice as well, along with the English version that Murshid gave us, which is, this is not my body. This is the temple of God. This is not my heart. This is the altar of God. And Sára very recently, I think on her last retreat, her personal retreat, she brought a song of the melodic zikr of Inayat Khan, so with that melody and those words, and then layered in also are the English words of the zikr. So I've asked her to help lead us in that song and practice. Thank you.
Do you want to say more about how the zikr works? You don't have to.
Do you want to say more about how the zikr works?
We can just do it.
Okay.
It's your section.
I know.
I should put the words in here.
Mm.
I'm going to mute myself for just a moment while I type in the chat window so I don't deafen you. Hold on a second. So the melodic zikr, as Murshid gave it, has a specific melody where we sing the lower melody twice, the higher melody once, the lower melody once. So a total of 4 times. And then the English zikr that he offered. This is not my body, this is the temple of God. This is not my heart, this is the altar of God. And the movements that we do with it, he also instructed that we begin by sweeping down to the left, across, straight up, down into the solar plexus first, then up, and then the hu goes down into the heart. So you're welcome to join us in any of that that feels nourishing for you. La ilaha illallah, la
Thank you, friends. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Rahima. I'm so pleased that I made a big list of things about practices and Cheragging. Would you like to be on the camera or no?
That's fine.
Okay. and listening to Raqiba and Rahima and sharing practices with both of you beautiful beings, I don't have to say anything. I've just marked everything off my list. There's nothing else to say. Just show up and do the things. Or get out of the way and do the things. There's some combination there. So thank you, Rahima. And for those of you who might not know, Rahima is one of the Sirajas in Saratanayat. That is one of the senior teachers who can offer support and mentorship, guidance, training, and ordinations for Cherags, for folks who feel called to the path of spiritual service in that particular form. Speaking of which, there is so often in the work of, in every kind of work, and maybe spoken about more explicitly in the form of spiritual leadership, spiritual support, and ministry, and counseling, and spiritual direction, and Cherag work, that there's a recognition of the path of spiritual service and the way that each of us is called to the path. And it is often spoken about as a calling and an essential foundation of needing to recognize that call and how it shows up in each of our lives, in our hearts, in our awareness. And some of us hear it as a gentle, persistent whisper, and some of us hear it as a foghorn that is waking and piercing through as an undeniable clamor. And for some of us, it is a complex field of curiosity, of interest that takes some time to understand, to recognize, and to heed. To heed meaning not just to hear it, but also to obey. That is right. I know, I see you, Raqiba. And there's a value about each of us really putting due diligent attention and time and spaciousness into what that call sounds and feels like for each of us, and also sometimes the way that we might mistake ego motive, that is, I want to do this, versus a call that comes from the spirit of guidance and the voice of God. And I'm so grateful to hear both Raqiba and Rahima talking about sorting out the small s self and the big S self. And that is such an important part, defining characteristic on the Sufi path of clearing out the ego motives, about managing the nafs, that is the voice of those lower selves. I don't want to be too confusing about the nafs, and this doesn't need to turn into a lecture about the nafs, but there are these different aspects of what is the self that is asserting voice right now, and what are the ways that each of us are called to do a really careful, thorough job of sorting through the different motives that come from the different levels of our personalities and our ego constructs in the world. And so many of the practices that are most supportive and honorable on the path of the Cherag have to do with sorting through those different voices and motives. Which is why so much of what both of these beautiful beings have shared with you today are about the zikr practice of clearing things out, of making space, of dropping into the depths of the heart and being able to tend to the authentic voice of the soul that really is the voice of God as she asserts herself in our humanness. And that is confusing for us in our humanness, because there are lots of other things that vie for our attention and our values. So it it is our responsibility and our sincerity to do the best we can with those different motives, voices, and contributing elements. And then from that space of as much clarity as we can find, then we are invited to implement our discipline in inviting the energies, the wazifa practices, the breath practices that help us really shape the energy that's available to us to recognize the call and to be able to pursue it with sincerity and constancy. So many of the things that we do in those regards have to do with how we turn our attention to the greatest possible wisdom that is often available to us through our living teachers and through the history, the silsila, the lineage stream of the wisdom body of Sufism. And the ways that we are encouraged on the Sufi path to get there are the whole series of fana practices that first point us to fana fi sheikh, that is, dissolving the self in the guidance of the living teacher. And all of us have access to a living teacher, every one of us. And there's always a question about how much confidence and how much respect and how much sincerity are we bringing to the relationship that we have with living teacher. And that confidence, that respect, and that dedication is lifted if we recognize the ways that the living teacher is attuned to and in service and loyal to the teacher beyond them, beyond the human being that we have confidence in. And it is their confidence in their teachers. And then it goes from those teachers into their confidence and sincerity and devotion to their teachers. And this is why the silsila is recognized and worked with as a living entity of wisdom, blessing, ethical accountability, sincerity of heart, and connection to the living voice of God that comes through all of the master saints and prophets, through all of the living teachers. And on the Sufi path, we have an extra, for me, it feels like an extra strength, stability of constancy and confidence that comes from knowing that those blessings are conveyed directly, hand to hand, heart to heart, as a living, conscious pouring forth of those blessings that Raqiba mentioned of Qudus and Wahhab, that is all of this purity and all of this endless generosity that is flowing through the chain of transmission, the golden chain of the teachers, hand to hand, unbroken through the generations, to the living vibration of how each of us in this moment are tending to that call and doing our absolute best to carry that in its purity, in its perfection, in its integrity for the benefit of all of the generations yet to come. So there's a tremendous responsibility and a service and an obligation that we as Cherags open ourselves to receive and to be pure channels for that to flow through us to where it's going. I have all confidence that each of us on this call right now and those that might be able to hear it later are doing our very best to hold that responsibility and to take it seriously, to recognize the weight of it, the importance of it, the beauty of it, and the preciousness of it that has been entrusted to us. And also the power that it carries to really implement and encourage lasting change and to promote the evolution of humanity. I know that sounds so big, and it is. And at the same time, our reach in our personal life can feel very small. But this message of spiritual liberty and of brotherhood, that's the word that Murshid used for it, of recognizing that all of humanity is one family, that all of humanity is as one body, that each nation is like an organ in that body, that each human being is like a living molecule in that body. And any tiny little aspect of that vast body of unified existence is powerful. That is, each of us has an essential task and an essential blessing that we can convey for healing, for harmony, for peace, for increased understanding, for tolerance, for patience, for an authentic flow of love and compassion that extends to all other human beings, that encourages ourselves and by example, not by lecture, but by example, to be the living representations of understanding, of kindness, of graciousness, to be able to step out of our judgments and our polarities, our divisions, our superiorities and inferiorities, our assumptions of something that is better or worse, and to be able to live that vibration of inspiring, powerful unity, harmony, friendship for all of humanity. And we do that as Cherags by welcoming, recognizing, and treating each other's beliefs, each other's gods, each other's practices, each other's paths with great respect. That's the real work of the Cherag. So the question for this meeting, for this way of the Cherag today is, what are the practices that help us get there? What are the practices that help us from this moment where we are standing, walking, sitting, lying down? Maybe in some moments we're in the middle of our path, lying down, having a tantrum and just kicking and screaming. Or sometimes we're melted in a puddle of confusion or feeling powerless or uncertain. And sometimes it's that we're standing, we're prepared, we're ready to go, but we need to understand what is the next step that is illuminated. It's the practices that meet us in each and every moment of our work as vehicles of light for the divine transmission of the blessings of God. And there'll be different practices in different phases, in different moments of our work. So part of the wisdom is recognizing what's the practice that's needed for me right now. And it's not necessarily the practices that'll make us feel better. It's not necessarily the practices that are the most comfortable or the most enjoyable. Sometimes it is. And sometimes it's the ones that, in the great wisdom words of my teacher, who I love, sometimes it's the practices that kick our ass. Sometimes it is being willing to show up, to listen, and to heed the spirit of guidance, which, as Ramat says, will absolutely kick our ass. But we're willing to show up for it. Sometimes it's just the courage, the tenacity, the faith, the trust that the guidance that is available to us is the right ones, even when it's really, really hard. Even when we're in a lot of pain. Maybe especially when we're in a lot of pain. Okay, friends. So I'm going to introduce a couple themes for us to discuss as a group, and after I say a few words about this, I'll pause the recording so that we can have some ease of conversation and not feel worried about being recorded. So there are a bunch of questions that I could bring into the mix, and to invite each of us in our own experience to reflect on, what are the practices that I am naturally drawn to? What are the practices that feel either immediately useful, immediately powerful, that I feel the effect of them instantaneously, and that are delicious for me? What are the practices, what are the forms of practices that are particularly challenging, but I recognize to be really important, that I really need to cultivate a relationship with? For example, a lot of people really don't like controlled breath practice, which is not, Raqiba mentioned a lot of different forms of breath practice. And the form that she led us in earlier is leaving the breath in its own natural rhythm. But there are also practices where you shape the breath on purpose as a discipline to develop willpower and mastery, and to use the breath as a tool for shaping your own energy and experience very deliberately according to a higher ideal. So those ones are often more difficult for people, but that people can recognize as being important and valuable, even if it's not fun. So things like that. What are the forms of practice that have helped you over your lifetime to discern the spirit of guidance, the call that is present in your own path, in your own heart, in your own life? Do you have a common rhythm of practice, a daily time that you dedicate to doing practices? Are you consistent about them? Or, and if so, how is that for you? And if not, why? Why not? So, with no judgment, just a curiosity of what's the rhythm? What would you like it to be? Um, do you have questions or longings about spiritual practices? Things that you would like to invite or understand more or integrate more, and maybe that you would like some support around? And I'm not asking you to ask for that support from this group right here, right now, but just recognizing what it is that we're longing for can help us aim our hearts in the direction to actually get the resources and the support that we wish. And are there ways that you really struggle with practices that you would be willing to share with us? That all of us have struggles with practices, and those are often harder to talk about, because we have a lot of ego motive tangled up with wanting to do a good job and be seen as holding things in a really good way. But being able to be among friends and to say, yeah, these are things that are really hard to get to, or that are really uncomfortable, or that I struggle with. So um, we'll I'll pause the recording, and we'll have about 10 minutes just to talk in amongst our group about these things to whatever extent you wish. So many beautiful, excellent, useful sharings, and I'm tempted to call them confessions, but they're not really confessions. Honest reports about our experience and the ways that things change, which is such an important thing for us to remember and to find our peace with, and just recognizing what's really living appropriate, accessible, and in right rhythm with our lives and our work. And things are always changing and moving, and we are always changing and moving. So tending to that field of dynamic life reality is so good. Okay, I have a few more things I'd like to read to you. I pulled out some readings for you. One of them is about, this is from Piro Murshid Inayat Khan's Instructions to the Murshid, which is a whole lot of teachings and practices and explanations about how things work, so that the teachers that he was supporting and training how to teach could make things useful for the communities that they were serving. So this is a section where he described wazifa, and he called it the secret of mantra yoga. The secret of mantra yoga. Number one, there are three of these. Number one, the vibrations of particular words and syllables naturally take a certain direction in touching certain centers of the body, for they awaken in these centers the spirit of their motive. I'll read that again. The vibrations of particular words and syllables naturally take a certain direction in touching certain centers of the body, for they awaken in these centers the spirit of their motive. Number 2, the meaning of a word suggests God, who is in one's soul, to awaken and occupy itself in creating all that is in its power. I'll read that again too. Number 2, the meaning of a word suggests God, who is in one's soul, to awaken and occupy itself in creating all that is in its power. And number 3, this is the secrets of mantra yoga, the secret of reciting sacred phrases over and over again. Number 3, certain words have risen from the souls who have touched perfection. And these words, in reality, are the offshoots of perfection itself. They therefore have dynamic power to burst up, which causes an eruption and flood of the effect suggested by the word. Here's that one more time. Certain words have risen from the souls who have touched perfection, and these words, in reality, are the offshoots of perfection itself. They, therefore, have dynamic power to burst up, which causes an eruption and flood of the effect suggested by the word. Pretty good, huh? Might as well use it. It's useful. It's powerful. Okay, we have just a few minutes left, and I would like to invite any closing reflections from Raqiba and Rahima before we close with a prayer. Raqiba, anything you'd like to add in here?
I think I just want to add, like encouragement of how, like Aliella was saying, our practices do show up in informal ways, and life is always throwing so much at us. And it's just, we don't have to be hard on ourselves for like not maintaining a constant rhythm, and we can always come back. It's like you can always come back to whatever. And, like just finding 5 minutes a day to connect inwardly to our breath or to a practice or to recite a prayer while we're, driving or in our yard or doing the dishes is powerful. So everybody's amazing, and I love you guys.
Thank you, Raqiba. Rahima, anything closing reflections for you?
Yes, and encouragement, just remembering to return to what it is that you love, what is the beauty that you love, and the practices can show up in that. So, yeah.
Awesome. I have a few more minutes so I can read you some more Murshid. I also brought you a passage from, this is a few excerpts from a paper of Murshid's called Prayers Before Lectures. And I think most of you are familiar with this particular paper. That was an instruction that he gave about when you're trying to be of service, when you're trying to go and support and offer something useful and true, authentic and honorable and beautiful to your community, how do you prepare? So prayers before lectures. This is not the whole paper, but some short excerpts from it. To say prayers means to invoke your wisdom and also connects you with all the Murshids in chain. And it inspires you to receive all wisdom from these sources and reflections from them. There are 3 ways before the lecture. First, hold thought of Murshid. When you are perfectly accomplished and successful this way, then the second way is to listen to sound and not consider Murshid. But this cannot be done until you are so developed that the sound is always with you. This is better than the first. Third way is to see Nuri Muhammad. This is the best possible way, And by practice, you advance to such an extent, whenever you want, you can close your eyes and see light, or Nuri Muhammad. Never try to say what you don't feel. Say every word from your own heart and feelings, and that is the only force and impression. Teach what you like to do yourself. Prescribe what you have been prescribed yourself. Say what you feel is right and justified for your own self. This is the way for a murshid to feel. Say what you mean. Do what you say. No hypocrisy. Say what you feel and do and prove it right. It keeps the conscience pure and good and gives inspiration and all success in life. Thank you, Murshid. Okay, we're going to close with the prayer khatum. I'll put it in the chat window for you. O thou, who art the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the Lord of heaven and earth, open our hearts that we may hear thy voice, which constantly cometh from within. Disclose to us thy divine light, which is hidden in our souls, that we may know and understand life better. Most merciful and compassionate God, give us thy great goodness. Teach us thy loving forgiveness. Raise us above the distinctions and differences which divide. Send us the peace of thy divine Spirit, and unite us all in thy perfect being. Amen. Okay, friends, I do have a closing blessing for you because I try to be a good Cherag. And I want to just say thank you again to Raqiba and Rahima for sharing your wisdom and your experience and your sincerity with us today. And for all of you that have been part of the conversation and sharing the depth and beauty of your own practices and life's path, and that all of these beautiful Cherags and Sirajas are easily findable on our Sarationite website. So you're welcome to go there to see where they are and be in touch with them directly if you would like to share further conversation or ask for their support in your life and your community. May the blessings of God rest upon you. May God's peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your hearts, now and forevermore. Amen.